Hello, Virgo. I want to start by saying something about the word lucky because lucky is in this title, and I do not use the word casually or in the way it is sometimes used to describe someone who got something good without apparent reason or without apparent earning in the form of a random and undeserved gift from circumstances that were not responding to anything in particular that the lucky person did or became or worked toward. That is not the lucky I am describing, and it is not the lucky you are about to feel. In whatever specific form the feeling takes, when it arrives in the real and embodied dimension of your actual daily life, in the near and specific future that this reading is pointing toward. The lucky you are about to feel is the specific form of lucky that arrives when everything you have been working toward arrives at once in the simultaneous and convergent form of multiple things landing at the same moment rather than in the sequential and spaced out form of things arriving one at a time over a period long enough that each arrival is absorbed before the next one lands, and the accumulation of the arrivals does not produce the overwhelming quality of lucky that the simultaneous form produces in someone who is receiving multiple things at once from multiple directions without having specifically planned for the simultaneity of what is arriving. That is the lucky, and it is coming. And it is coming now. Welcome, and stay with me. Through every word of this, now, the destiny, because you cannot stop destiny, is the other half of the title. And it deserves its own honest and direct attention. Before I describe what is arriving and when and in what form, destiny is a word that can feel in the hands of someone who uses it without grounding, like the abdication of agency, the specific and convenient position of someone who wants what happens to them to be the result of forces larger than themselves, rather than the result of choices and effort and becoming in the ordinary and specific form that choices and effort and becoming take when they are producing something real rather than waiting for destiny to produce it instead. That is not the destiny I am describing either. The destiny I am describing is the specific form of the particular trajectory that a specific combination of who you are and what you have been doing and what you have been becoming was always going to produce when sufficient time had passed and sufficient accumulation had occurred for the trajectory to arrive at its natural destination, which is what destiny is, when it is understood correctly rather than mystically. Your destiny is not something happening to you from outside yourself without your participation in the form of a predetermined outcome that was decided for you before you had the chance to participate in its production. Your destiny is the natural and arriving destination. of the specific trajectory that you have been on in the form of who you are and what you have been doing and what you have been becoming over the full period of the building. That produced the trajectory that is now arriving at its destination in the form of the lucky you are about to feel when multiple things land simultaneously from the directions they have been building from toward this specific moment. You cannot stop it because you are it. The destiny cannot be stopped because it is the natural arrival of what you already are and what you have already built and what you have already become, which cannot be unbuilt or unbecome in the way that destiny can sometimes be stopped when the person who is supposed to arrive at it has not yet done the work that the arriving requires of the person who arrives. You have done the work, and the destiny is the arrival of someone who has done it at the natural and inevitable destination that the doing was always leading toward. I want to say something about the cannot stop in the title because cannot stop has a particular resonance for someone who has been trying to stop things before in the specific and understandable form of someone who has gotten close to something good and then watched it not arrive or arrive in a smaller form than was hoped for, or arrive and then shift into something that was not the good thing it appeared to be at the moment of the initial arrival. The cannot stop of this specific destiny is different from those because the cannot stop is not about the external circumstances being favorable or the other people involved being reliable or the timing being exactly right. In all the ways that timing needs to be exactly right for the good thing to arrive and stay arrived rather than shift into something else when the timing was not quite as right as it appeared. The cannot stop is about the internal trajectory, which is yours, and which has been building in the accumulated form of who you are and what you have done and what you have become. And that kind of trajectory, the internal kind, built from the inside out over the full period of the accumulation, cannot be stopped by the external because the external is not what produced it and is not what will sustain it. When it arrives in the convergent and simultaneous form that the luckiest feeling requires of what the luckiest person in the world feels like from the inside of the feeling, because I want you to be able to recognize it. When it arrives in whatever specific and personal form your life delivers it in, rather than waiting for a particular and predetermined version of it, that might not match the form your life is choosing for the delivery of the lucky that is specifically and personally yours. The feeling of being the luckiest person in the world is not the feeling of having won something, or of having been given something, or of having been the random recipient of circumstances that could have gone to anyone, but that happened to go to you by the particular randomness of luck in the casual and undeserved form that the word sometimes implies. The feeling is more like recognition The specific and full body form of someone who looks at their life in a single and specific moment and sees everything that is actually there in the complete and unedited form of what is actually present, rather than the ordinary edited form of someone who is moving through their life without stopping long enough to see it clearly in the full and present and complete form. It is actually in when someone takes the time to look, the moment of the looking and seeing everything that is actually there is the moment of feeling like the luckiest person in the world. And the lucky is not the result of something arriving only, but of the capacity to see what has arrived in the full and grateful form of someone who stops and looks and sees everything that is actually there. I want to describe the specific moment of the luckiest feeling in more sensory detail, because the detail matters for how fully you can inhabit the feeling when it arrives in the real and embodied form of your actual daily life, rather than only in the abstract form of something being described before it has arrived. In the full and sensory version that the arriving will produce, the moment arrives quietly, which is the most important thing to know about it. Before it comes, because the luckiest feeling does not arrive with a fanfare or with the dramatic external announcement of something significant having happened. That requires the specific recognition of a significant event. In the ordinary processing of a day, it arrives in a pause, the specific and quiet pause between one thing and the next thing. In the ordinary movement of an ordinary day, when you are not doing anything specific other than being present, in the brief and available form of the pause between things, and in that pause, something opens in the interior of the person who is in it. And what opens is the capacity to see everything that is actually there in the full and complete and unedited form that the pause between things makes available when it is inhabited fully rather than filled immediately with the next thing before the opening has had time to produce what it is capable of producing, in someone who allows the pause to be a pause rather than only a transition between things that need doing in that pause. The luckiest feeling arrives in the quiet and complete form of someone who sees their life and finds it good, in the full and present and unedited form of what is actually there. When the capacity to see it arrives in the pause between things in your life, in the simultaneous and convergent form, that will produce the moment of the luckiest person when you stop and look and see all of it at once. In the relational dimension, something is arriving or has arrived or is in the final stages of arriving. That is the specific and significant form of a connection that is choosing you in the full and deliberate way of something that has considered and concluded and is now moving in your direction with the confidence of someone who knows what they want and is going to it rather than waiting for it to come to them in the patient and hoping form of someone who is not yet sure enough to move. The moving is already happening in your relational dimension. And when it arrives in the visible space of your actual life, it will be one of the things that the luckiest person sees when they stop and look at the full and present and complete form of what is actually there in their specific life right now. In the material dimension, something is opening in the specific and concrete form of an opportunity or a shift or a recognition that changes the financial or professional dimension of your daily life in a way that makes the daily life feel more like a chosen life and less like a managed life. In the distinction between those two forms, that the difference between the life you are in and the life you have chosen always produces in the person who is living one and moving toward the other. The material dimension is shifting, and when the shift has fully landed, it will be another thing that the luckiest person sees in the moment of stopping and looking and seeing everything that is actually there. And in the internal dimension, the most quiet and the most significant of the three things arriving, something is settling in the specific and embodied form of a piece that has been building underneath the surface of the preceding season without always being visible to the person inside it as the building it was doing, rather than the ordinary texture of things, simply continuing in the form they were in without the particular quality of building that it was actually doing, on the way to the settling that is now arriving as the quiet and full form of the luckiest feeling in its deepest available register, the peace that settles after a long period of the kind of movement that does not always feel like progress, but that is progress in the accumulated and invisible form that finally resolves into settling. When enough of it has happened for the settling to be available as the natural next state of someone who has done what the preceding season required and who is now in the season, that receives what the doing produced. Relational, material, internal, all three arriving in the simultaneous and convergent form that produces the luckiest person when they are seen together in the single moment of stopping and looking that the feeling requires of the person who is in it. Now, three things I want you to do. With the knowing of what is arriving, in the days that follow this reading, the first, stop at some point today, or in the very near days that follow today, and look at your life in the full and unedited form of what is actually there, rather than in the ordinary edited form of someone who is moving through it without the stop that allows the seeing, in the complete form that the luckiest feeling requires to be produced in someone who is in the life that deserves the luckiest feeling, but who has not yet stopped long enough to feel it fully in the present and unedited form. It is available in when the stopping happens, and the looking is allowed to be complete. Stop and look, and let the lucky arrive in whatever specific form your life has been building it in for the delivery that is now ready. The second, trust the convergence in the specific form of not managing. Each of the three things arriving into something smaller and more familiar and more proportionate to the size of what has arrived before in the preceding season, when the convergence was not happening and the arrivals were sequential and spaced rather than simultaneous and overwhelming, in the way that the luckiest feeling requires them to be, to produce what it is capable of producing in someone who allows it, in the full and unmanaged form, rather than the reduced and familiar form that the management would produce in the name of not getting too excited or not setting expectations that might not be met, in the full and complete form that the trust would allow for. Trust the convergence in the full and available form of someone who knows that what is arriving was always going to arrive at this specific moment for the specific person they are, who build toward this in the ordinary days of the extraordinary accumulation. And the third, receive the lucky as yours without the apologetic quality that sometimes accompanies good things arriving in the life of someone who is not entirely certain that the good things are proportionate to what they have done or who they are or what they deserve from the specific convergence that is producing the luckiest feeling in the simultaneous and complete form that this reading is describing. The lucky is proportionate to the work and the becoming and the continuing through the preceding season that was not always recognizable as the building it was doing from the inside of the person building it, without the external confirmation that would have made the building visible. As such, while it was happening, it is proportionate. Receive it in the full and unapologetic form of someone who knows that the lucky was earned in the quiet and ordinary and extraordinary form of the accumulation that produced it as its natural and arriving destination. You are about to feel like the luckiest person in the world, not because luck is random and random luck is landing on you, but because the specific trajectory of who you are and what you have done and what you have become has arrived at the natural destination that specific trajectory was always going to arrive at when enough time had passed and enough accumulation had occurred for the convergence to happen in the simultaneous and complete form of the luckiest feeling that this moment is delivering. You cannot stop destiny because you are the destiny. And the destiny is arriving in the full and complete form of everything that was always going to arrive for the specific person who did the specific work. That produced the specific trajectory that is now at its destination. Welcome to the luckiest. Whew. It is yours in the full and arriving and undeniable form of something that was always going to be yours when the time came, which is now